Good morning, YouTube Warbles. On a lot here with the conclusion of the round table discussion and then a short warble rant.
It's a job that it sort of gives him dignity and standing, gives him an opportunity to continue to be of service to the country, and it's a job that is dignified enough and prestigious enough to accord with his previous life as Prime Minister. He's not going to take, and he has rejected overseas postings. People are always saying, get him out of the country. No, he's not going to take that. And so I think that it's an offer that he couldn't refuse, particularly as the former head of Australians for Constitutional Monarchy. And I think it would be a delicious irony to have Malcolm Turnbull, who was his foe as the head of the Australian Republicans movement, appointing him as Governor General.
That would be intriguing.
And then having him actually technically outrank him.
Yeah.
It's just brilliant. But look, Malcolm Turnbull, when asked about it...
Tony Abbott is a political warrior. Why would he want that kind of role, though?
Well, he's also a man who wants to be of service. Now, if you say political warrior, who is he warring against? Who is he fighting? He should be fighting the Labor Party. And what we're seeing is that by his speaking out within the party, for instance, on the schools funding, his voice was the only one from the Liberal Party that was raised against it. He is actually causing great damage to the Turnbull government. And, division is death, and doesn't matter whose fault it is, it reflects badly on the government. And they will not win an election divided with this apparent division, because actually the parliamentary party is very united. But because every time Tony Abbott opens his mouth, it becomes front page news, because he is such a good deliverer of sound bites, and he's so interesting, and he's got that great sort of history behind him, and the connections to a lot of media. He is going to continue to be a thorn in the side. If he's Governor General, he can't speak.
Susan, Governor General Tony Abbott?
No, why not? Bad idea. Well, clever idea, but Miranda, but bad one. Well, look, he doesn't have the personality. I mean, the job of the Governor General, we know what it is. We've had excellent Governors General for a long time. It's dealing with people. It's being apolitical. It's stepping right back from the political fray. I mean, we made Bill Hayden our Governor General, and Bill stepped right out of party politics. I can't see Abbott having the discipline. He'd have opportunities to give speeches all over the countryside, and I can't see him having the discipline to say, well, now I just have a bringing the nation together role. I think it's a really bad idea, and I think really Turnbull should try and get him overseas. I know he doesn't.
Well, he doesn't want overseas. Tony, he wants a front bench position. Should Turnbull swallow his pride and do what Tony Abbott did to Turnbull after he knifed Turnbull and made him a front bench minister?
Well, what I'd say to Miranda is, if you put him in Yarralumla, that's not a great day for the news business. But as a big R Republican, not a small R Republican, I might say that it'd be a mischievous idea to put him in Yarralumla, because I think it would provide a boost for the cause. But seriously, I feel that
Queen's still around, mate. The Queen's still around. All those false alarms this week. She's still there.
The Queen's still standing, but not the consort apparently. But in the case of Tony Abbott, look, I agree with Miranda in one sense, that I think something useful should be found for him to do. And I wasn't sure that finding something for him in the Indigenous Affairs area wouldn't have made a lot of sense as a peace offering, and also a way of engaging him in an area about which he's passionate. So, I'm not someone who thinks that Tony Abbott doesn't have a useful role to play in our public life. So, I think there should be a little, Turnbull should find it in his heart to make some gestures there.
Yeah. Well, Prime Minister, of course, was in New York briefly this week to talk with the new president, Donald Trump. It was their first meeting since that infamous phone conversation that was reported in February, where the president apparently hung up on the Prime Minister, saying that this refugee was a bad deal. All forgiven, Miranda?
Well, certainly looks like it, and terrific for Malcolm Turnbull that Donald Trump was in such a great mood. And, on the Intrepid, which is really a museum now that he's put a lot of money into, Malcolm Rupert Murdoch was there, Richard Pratt, Anthony Pratt,
yeah. Who's also on both Anthony Pratt and Malcolm Turnbull were primetime guests on Fox News Channel. That would have been Rupert's doing, no doubt.
Right. Well, there you go. And so it's really an embrace and an endorsement of Malcolm Turnbull by Donald Trump and the whole sort of Australian diaspora overseas.
Yeah. What do you make of it, Susan?
Well, very good PR. Good to see, nice images of everyone being nice to everyone. After the bumpy start of Turnbull being gazumped for a while other things had to happen, I think it is important to acknowledge and celebrate the Coral Sea victory. And it was great to see the 90-year-old veterans there. That was really good. No one can
Indeed. What a lovely
anything
sight.
other than moved by that. But I think the ongoing issues of how we work with President Trump remain to be solved.
Well, whenever an Australian Prime Minister meets with the President, the big elephant in the room, Tony Walker, is China. What did you make of that New York Times story this week? It got no attention in Australia, that the Trump Pentagon is rejecting requests from the US Navy to sail freedom of navigation patrols through the South China Sea. What does that mean for Australia?
Well, it was done quietly, as you say, Tom. I noticed the New York Times report when it emerged, and I thought, that's interesting. And these decisions obviously come from the top, but the Pentagon is signing off on them. I think it's a significant development, and what it tells you is the US is intent on resetting its relationship, if I can use that word, with China. The importance of the North Korean issue is such that it subsumes other matters, including those relating to trade and so-called currency manipulation and so forth. So I think this was an important development, and it sends a signal to us. And I think the Turnbull Bishop team would be comforted by this, because they've been resistant to the idea of sailing within 12 nautical miles of these reefs and features in the South China Sea to make a sort of gratuitous statement. So I think this is part of Trump trying to elevate the relationship to another level, and I think that's a positive development.
But imagine if the Abbott or the Turnbull government had supported these freedom of navigation patrols through this contentious area in the South China Sea, and I think the Obama administration did 4 of them. Trump doesn't do it. Would we be isolated in the region?
Well, I think it was a sensible approach, if I may say so, by Bishop and Turnbull, not to accede to the sort of domestic pressures they're under, and from the Labor Party, frankly. And Stephen Conroy, when he was Defence Minister, made some absolutely ridiculous statements about this. Not to engage in sort of gratuitous behaviour there, which would have had no great advantage to us.
And it wasn't just Conroy, it was also I think some of his other colleagues like David Feeney, who said this week that the Prime Minister needs to man up and front Donald Trump. I mean, he looks like a bit of a hypocrite, doesn't he, Miranda?
Well, of course he does. But look, I think that the essential problem here is that, or not problem, but Australia's problem is that we really rely entirely on the US for our defence. And their military has been run down so much during the Obama years that they don't have the capacity really to fight more than 1.5 wars.
That's it for our Sunday Roundtable. Thank you to my guests, Miranda Devine from Sydney's Daily Telegraph, former Labor Minister Susan Ryan, and leading journalist and academic Tony Walker. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, what a fascinating idea. Tony Abbott for Governor General. He could hardly say no, because he's such a thumping, red-hot monarchist. I mean, he loves the idea of the monarchy. So if you offered him the chance to be Governor General of Australia, he'd say yes. I think they're right when they say that he'd be a terrible person in the role, just because of how his head works. The way Australia's government works, we have a Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister actually answers to the Governor General, and the Prime Minister appoints a cabinet of ministers. One of them is the defence minister, and the defence minister commands the loyalty and obedience of the Australian Defence Forces. So you've got admirals and air marshals and field marshals in the army, and there's a chain of command that works back that way. But effectively, the entire Australian Defence Force, its commander-in-chief is the Queen of England. And she has appointed a Governor-General of her forces in the colonies, or the dominions. So you could actually visualise some scenarios, technically an infinite number of them, in which Tony Abbott could convince himself that for the good of the realm, he needed to command the army to control the parliament because they were becoming unruly, you know, in his view as a dedicated servant of the Queen. Parliament was heading off in directions that he didn't think were sufficiently Anglophilic. Yeah, he could do that. But yeah, meanwhile, the big news this week was that Australia's prime muppet, Mal-Gollem, Mal as in bad and Gollum as in an artificial being constructed of clay from Judaic mythology. Sort of like an evil robotic zombie. He was summoned to go and visit America and meet Tronald Dump on an aircraft carrier that's beached in the mud, and it's a museum effectively to the memory of back in the days when America actually had respectable relationships with its allies, kind of more or less sort of thing. So a week before the budget, Australia's prime muppet flies, I don't know, 8,000, 10,000 miles, and he's going over there to have a 3-hour meeting. And when he gets there, he's told that the 3-hour meeting's put on ice and he's got to sit in a waiting room because Tronald Dump is busy celebrating that he has passed 1/3 of the distance that he needs to go in order to completely destroy America's public healthcare system. Because what he's apparently proposing to do is set things up so that the premium for anybody with a pre-existing health condition is going to be approximately equal to the annual cost of treating that disease or condition, which entirely defeats the purpose of health insurance. I speak as a figure of some authority because I used to work at the Vegetable Creek Hospital at Emerald, and the first health insurance scheme in Australia was at Vegetable Creek. Back when it was a gold mining settlement, the miners, talking to the Chinese miners who were there, heard of a system in China whereby all the miners paid 6 pence per week into a fund which paid the doctor's salary and got medical supplies and everything while they were working. And if they got too sick to work, they stopped paying and the doctor treated them for free until they were fit enough to work again. And that was the first medical benefits scheme in Australia at Vegetable Creek. It started back in, the 1860s. So the whole idea of it is that the healthy people contribute their funds to cover the cost of caring for the sick. That's how health insurance or national health services work, not in Tronald Dump's America. In Uncle Spam, unless you can afford out of your own pocket to pay for it, if you've got an existing condition, the premium will be calculated so that you can't afford to do anything but drop off the perch and die. Okay, so while celebrating that, my prime muppet got stuck in a waiting room for 3 hours. And then he was promised a 30-minute meeting that was going to grow to 40 minutes, but apparently it stayed at 30 minutes. And then he got to sit beside Tronald Dump while everybody made speeches about the Battle of the Coral Sea, when the Japanese were denied their intent of invading Port Moresby by sea. So, there we go. Tony Abbott for Governor General, and if he gets there, he'll be able to command the entire Australian Defence Forces and tell the Prime Minister to fuck himself with a raw cucumber. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.